Order. Johanna Baxter to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of returning forcibly deported children to Ukraine. I'd like to start this debate by welcoming a distinguished guest into the hall today, Olena Kondrachuk, the Deputy Chair of the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine, and her colleagues from the Ukrainian Embassy to the UK. Her presence is not only welcome, but shows that our two nations' great democratic institutions stand united alongside the families of the thousands of stolen children of Ukraine, and that today we commit ourselves to ensuring that our work will continue until every single Ukrainian child is returned home. Earlier this year, I joined the APPG for Ukraine and UK Friends of Ukraine on a delegation of British parliamentarians to mark the third anniversary of Putin's illegal and bloody war. It was unquestionably one of the most humbling experiences of my life to meet the brave men and women, unbroken in spirit, fighting courageously for their freedom and for their homeland. It's an experience that will stay with me forever. On that visit, I met the Ukrainian Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets. What we discussed at that meeting was devastating. The systematic abduction of Ukrainian children by Russian forces, a grave crime that continues unabated to this day. When Dmytro told me that at least 19,546 Ukrainian children had been stolen, I had to ask him to repeat the number, because I simply could not believe that a crime of this magnitude was taking place before our very eyes, and no one was talking about it. The official estimates are horrendous enough, but some other organisations estimate that the total number of children stolen could be much, much higher. The Russian Federation's Children's Ombudsman has stated that they have accepted 700,000 Ukrainian children since the start of their full-scale invasion in Ukraine. When I returned from Ukraine, I made it my purpose to ensure that the scale of this crime receives the attention that it demands in this place. That's why in April, alongside UK Friends of Ukraine, I co-authored a report titled "Return the Stolen Children of Ukraine." That report lays out in no uncertain terms a detailed timeline of the systematic abduction and forcible deportation of Ukrainian children from Russian-occupied territories. It highlights that President Putin has personally directed Russia's Children's Commissioner to identify and streamline bureaucratic barriers, not to protect children, but to fast-track their placement into Russian families. It highlights that Putin's presidential aircraft is complicit in flying Ukrainian children from occupied Donetsk to Moscow. It highlights the role of federal and regional officials across Russia, occupied Ukraine and Belarus in the deportation of those children and the deliberate erasure of their Ukrainian identity. It highlights that military-style camps have been set up to indoctrinate those children, teaching them basic combat skills and loyalty to the Russian state. It highlights that parents in occupied territories are being coerced into sending their children to so-called summer camps across Russia, camps designed to distance them permanently from their homeland. And it highlights that today... I'll give way to the honourable member.
Thank you, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for obtaining this debate. And I had the honour of joining you on that visit to Ukraine earlier this year, and it was life-changing. It is also life-changing for these children who have been stolen by Putin's thugs. And childhood is a very short period of our lives. And so I hope my colleague will agree with me that the Minister will give us some sense of urgency around getting these children home again. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention and indeed will come on to what I hope the Minister will be able to set out later in my speech. The report also highlights that today Ukrainian children in occupied areas are now being used to support Russia's drone development and production efforts. Children are being made to assist a war machine. And since the publication of our report, the situation has only worsened. Russia's First Deputy Education Minister recently announced that approximately 53,000 Ukrainian children from occupied territories will spend their summer holidays in camps, not in their homes, not with their families, but scattered throughout occupied territories. Mr Chairman, these are not just numbers. They are children, they are sons, they are daughters, taken from their families, taken from their culture, taken from their country. Today's debate isn't just about numbers, it's about the stories of the children, like Kira and Margarita. Margarita was 10 months old when she was taken from a children's home in Kherson, a baby. She couldn't walk, she couldn't talk, but she was already a target of the Russian regime. She was taken to Moscow under the excuse of needing medical care, which she did not need. She ended up in the arms of a senior Russian politician and close ally of President Putin. He adopted her. He changed her name to Marina, changed her birthplace to a Russian city, registered her as his daughter. That baby girl, just months old, had her whole identity rewritten, erased. Legally Russian, now the truth buried. And it isn't care, that's abduction in the uniform of bureaucracy. Kira was an 11-year-old girl from Mariupol. At 10, she lost her mother. Then, during the invasion, she watched her father die, shot by Russian forces on their balcony as he tried to save what little they had left. She fled with her father's partner, walking for a full day to reach her grandmother. Along the way, a landmine exploded. Russian soldiers came, and Kira was taken, separated from her loved ones, told she'd be sent to a remote orphanage in Russia if no one came to collect her. Weeks later, terrified and alone, she remembered she had a telephone. She called her grandfather. He found her traumatised but alive and brought her home. She said, she's 11 years old, she said, the Russians took my childhood, my city and my dad. Kira was one of the first children rescued by the Bring Kids Back initiative, supported by the United Kingdom, which to date has helped return 1,307 children, including two children brought home over the weekend. We now have clear and credible evidence, including from the Yale University Humanitarian Research Lab, that approximately 8,400 Ukrainian children have been forcibly transferred to at least 57 so-called re-education camps. They span across 8 time zones, from occupied Crimea all the way to Magadan in Russia's Far East. And inside those camps, Ukrainian children are indoctrinated. They're told that Russia's brutal invasion is justified. Ukrainian history is erased from textbooks. Mentions of Ukraine as a sovereign nation are removed. And this isn't just the rewriting of the story, it's deleting it. It's a chilling, systematic attempt to dismantle Ukrainian identity, starting with the youngest and the most vulnerable. And Russia is not stopping at cultural erasure. In occupied territories, there's mounting evidence that over 10,000 children are being trained in drone warfare. The training is gamified, turning it into some twisted kind of play and taught through special engineering classes, where students are instructed on how to build and deploy drones for the Russian military. To make matters worse, occupation authorities in Donetsk and Luhansk have signed cooperation agreements with the Russian Young Army Cadets National Movement. The goal: to scale up the recruitment of Ukrainian children into pro-Kremlin, military patriotic youth organisations. According to the Institute for the Study of War, as many as 11,500 Ukrainian children may already be involved. And the Russian adoption system operates as a tool of administrative erasure, where Ukrainian children are absorbed into a bureaucratic structure deliberately designed to erase their cultural and national identity. For those taken in infancy, this practice all but guarantees that an entire generation grew up on Russian soil, utterly unaware of their Ukrainian roots. This isn't just occupation, it's indoctrination, it's militarisation, it's a deliberate state-led campaign to steal Ukraine's future one child at a time. And it's a war crime playing out before our very eyes. As the House will already know, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for President Vladimir Putin and the so-called Children's Rights Commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, for the war crime of unlawful deportation of children. As our report set out, I believe there is sufficient evidence and scope to consider whether charges of crimes against humanity and genocide could also be considered under the international criminal law. It's certainly clear that Russia's actions commit flagrant violations of international humanitarian law and international conventions and treaties to which Russia is a party. To conclude, in calling for this debate today, I'm calling for the Government to work with our international partners to take all unnecessary measures to secure the immediate return.
On that point, with my honourable friend,
thank
my honourable friend. Can I congratulate my honourable friend on securing this debate? But not only that, since my honourable friend's visit to Ukraine, the honourable member has worked tirelessly to raise the profile of this issue, both with her report, Return the Stolen Children of Ukraine, and also in the floor of the House, and again today, and she should be congratulated for all of her work. But on the practical measures which can be taken to help return the stolen children to their families, does the honourable member, my friend, agree with me that the Minister should consider establishing a UK National Day of Action to continue her great work and help raise public awareness of this cause yet further?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and completely agree that I have already called for the Government to recognise a UK Day of Action to highlight the profile of this issue to the wider public. Our report also calls for Russia to publish a full register of all Ukrainian children in its custody, as required under the Geneva Convention. We also are calling for Russia to provide a framework jointly agreed upon by both parties for the return of every Ukrainian child who has been forcibly deported. We should also expand our intelligence sharing and support for child trafficking efforts. We need to know where the children are, who has taken them, who is hiding them, because every day that passes, it's getting harder to bring them home. And on sanctions, I'm calling for sanctions to be targeted, biting and relentless on every official, every agency, every person complicit in these crimes, from the senior politicians to the Russian organisations running re-education camps. I previously called for a special tribunal for the crime of aggression, and I'm pleased to see the UK, alongside 40 partners, has agreed to a framework. But for this, I would also ask the Minister if he can share a bit more detail on the scope of this tribunal. This debate, Mr Chairman, is about turning up the volume on this issue. It's about making sure that no one can say, "We did not know." We need your help to amplify this. We need more pressure, more action, more urgency, because every day that we delay, another child forgets their name.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate, and would suggest an informal 4-minute time limit to allow all those who wish to speak to be able to do so. The question is that this House has considered returning forcibly deported children to Ukraine. And I call Afra Brandeth.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. It's It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and can I also thank and congratulate the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for securing today's debate on such an important topic and for speaking so powerfully on it. Last month I visited Ukraine alongside colleagues on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I want to pay tribute to all the officials of our government and the Ukrainian parliamentarians and officials that we met on the ground who are working tirelessly on this issue. During our visit, we met with representatives of Save Ukraine, an organisation that are committed to helping rescue and return children. At the time of our visit, they had successfully returned more than 612 children, an heroic effort. Yet, as we've heard today, an unacceptably high number remain missing, at least 19,000 identified, and almost certainly many, many thousands more. I want to share one account that I heard whilst in Ukraine. Just outside of Kyiv, I visited a children's centre where I spoke with two young people who had been taken by Russia. Although both now, thankfully, safely returned home to Ukraine, I cannot understate how clearly traumatising this experience had been for them and the impact of hearing their stories. The young man had been separated from his mother and his 5 siblings, taken to Russia to be re-educated. In reality, he was sent to a military camp where Ukrainian children are taught to forget their culture and their home, and through indoctrination are trained to forget all they once knew of a peaceful life in Ukraine and taught to be fighters, potentially one day against their own families. This is a truly horrific and often unreported consequence of Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. Chair, yesterday, those of us on the Foreign Affairs Committee met with our counterparts from the RADA's Foreign Affairs Committee. We heard how Russia is targeting orphanages to take children. These are vulnerable children who have suffered a great deal of trauma already and now are being subjected to even more. We also heard of the difficulty in getting these children back. Their locations often unknown to Ukrainian authorities, their surnames changed. It is clear that we must do more to support Ukraine in its efforts to identify, find and return these young people. Both the previous government and the current one have stood by Ukraine with regards to military support, and I know that our Ukrainian friends are incredibly grateful for our unity on this. I also want to urge the Minister here today to continue to provide humanitarian assistance through overseas development aid. Earlier this year, I agreed with the Prime Minister's decision to reallocate a portion of the ODA budget to bolster the defence budget, given the challenges and security problems that we currently face. But can I ask the Minister that when he has discussions with officials and his colleagues at the Treasury ahead of the publishing of the final outturn and future planned allocations annual report and accounts, that he reiterates the need of the Ukrainian people, particularly these children who have been kidnapped, and their families, and supports efforts and organisations and schemes to see them returned. We need the allocation of the ODA budget to be spent on vital causes, not vanity projects, and I'm sure all here will agree with me that the issue we are debating today is of the utmost importance. Mr. Stewart, since the start of the war, over 600 children have been killed, 1,900 injured, and at least 19 sexually abused. In this conflict, sexual violence is being used systematically, a grotesque weapon of war. Russia's actions violate the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, and UN Security Council Resolution 1261. We must not stand by. Russia is not just waging war on Ukraine's borders, it is waging war on Ukraine's future, trying to erase an entire generation. They are not just abducting children, they are trying to annihilate a national identity. I have heard 2 stories firsthand, but there are thousands more. We must see Ukraine's stolen children returned. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard Baker.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I begin by congratulating my honourable friend for Paisley and Renfrewshire South on securing this vital debate, and particularly on her excellent work with the UK Friends of Ukraine on authoring this so important but also so distressing report. And I'd like to focus my remarks, Chair, on the report's finding, particularly in relation to disabled children, because almost unbelievably, it's disabled children in particular who've been targeted by Russian forces for forcible deportation. Through my last role with the disability charity Enable, I was privileged to meet Raisa Kravchenko, the founder of the VGO Coalition and the mother of a young man with a learning disability in Kiev, who even in the midst of the invasion has formed an amazing support network for people with learning disabilities and their families. Anyone would find the experience of being in a bomb shelter terrifying, but how much more so for an autistic young person who already struggles with their environment. And of course, for many of these families of disabled children, leaving Ukraine is simply not an option. I was in contact again with Raisa this week. She told me how the impacts of the invasion are frustrating work in Ukraine as across Europe to move disabled children out of institutional care. And the issue here is this. Russian forces have targeted care institutions. So a disabled child will often be a care institution, and therefore they have been victims of kidnapping. And I thought this powerful report brought out the tragic consequences of this. They were laid bare in the report of the distressing story of Mikola and Anastasia, 2 children with autism and cerebral palsy among 46 children taken by Russian forces from Kherson Children's Home and relocated 180 miles away in Simferopol, Crimea. Their parents only found this location that their children were in 6 months later as a result of an investigation by the New York Times. One can only imagine the trauma they went through. The children were issued with Russian birth certificates, their names were changed, and they were put up for adoption in Russia. These children must have been under unimaginable stress over this period. And although they were finally reunited with their mother in 2024, tragically, Anastasia died from an epileptic seizure shortly after her 6th birthday. These are the human consequences, the horrendous cases which lie behind the grim statistics the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South shared with us so eloquently earlier in her speech. It's so important to recognise not only the level of trauma caused to disabled children by these terrifying ordeals, but also they're going to be affected by these ordeals for many, many years to come. So I want to close my remarks to the Minister by stressing 2 points. Firstly, there has to be accountability for this. And I was privileged to be a member of our delegation to the Council of Europe, which passed Resolution 2529 supporting the ICC arrest warrants and calling for parties to the Council of Europe to acknowledge these deportations and transfers of children by Russia as genocide. Secondly, as an international community, we need to stand by Ukraine and these children and their families to help them in the support of rehabilitation. This will not be any easy task, and for disabled children, it will require a particularly intensive amount of support and specialised support. So I very much support the recommendation made by my honourable friend in this vital report that there's support for this vital work from the UK, from our international partners, and indeed resources from the Trust Fund for Victims all should be utilised for this vital work. I congratulate again my honourable friend for all she is doing with the Friends of Ukraine to make the call for action against this horrific crime against Ukraine and its children, and to make sure that, yes, we look to the future for accountability, for rehabilitation, but also now for all we can do as a nation with international partners to stop this horrendous action by the Russian government and their forces.
Yeah. Richard Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to pay tribute to the honourable member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. Normally, we would congratulate somebody for securing a debate, but it just feels on this occasion it's just such an absolutely miserable subject that all I can say is, I'm as sorry as you are about what's going on here. It's ironic that yesterday at 2:30 in this hall we were debating kinship care and adoption, and we were debating adoption in the UK and British government support for that. And so when I first heard about the adoption by Russia of these Ukrainian children, I wondered whether it was some sort of exaggeration on the part of the people who were speaking about it. But then you look at the evidence that's provided, and this is absolutely going on. Independent investigators, the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab, identified in March this year 314 individuals from Ukraine who'd been placed in Russia's programme of coerced fostering or adoption, and it describes in great detail the circumstances that have gone on with those 314 children. But the scale of it is much greater than that. Indeed, Russia's Children's Commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, has boasted that 700,000 Ukrainian children have been so-called accepted into Russia since the war began. These children are being re-educated in an effort to assimilate them to Russian society. And we know that there are at least 57 re-education camps spread across Russian-occupied Ukraine, Belarus and Russia proper. This is an attempt to eradicate the national identity of Ukrainian children. Videos show children riding around on Belarusian tanks with children in body armour holding rifles. Reports suggest that the children are subjected to psychological coercion, denied their language and indoctrinated with Russian nationalist propaganda. The Belarusian president, Lukashenko, has personally endorsed this so-called humanitarian project. Of the nearly 20,000 children recorded as having been taken, little more than 1,000 have been recovered, just 7%. Maria Lvova-Belova is subject to an international arrest warrant, as we've heard is President Putin in relation to this alleged war crime. Yet she can be seen on state television describing how proud she is to have adopted a Ukrainian boy from Mariupol. While the Kremlin has been escalating these abductions, the international response has fallen somewhat short, and in some cases it has regressed. Just a few weeks ago, the United States government pulled funding from the Conflict Observatory based at Yale University. The Conflict Observatory that was compiling that evidence has very forensically identified satellite imagery, biometric data. It's tracked the identities of 30,000 Ukrainian children taken and their locations. This decision was made by Trump's State Department, and it has rightly drawn widespread criticism. I will.
Thank you for giving. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I was in Helsinki last week as part of my role on the Council of Europe, attending a conference on the deported Ukrainian children, which was an incredibly powerful event. But one of the most powerful things I heard actually was a gentleman from Yale University speaking about how this funding removal is going to impact the work that they're doing, and the work that they're doing is vital. And being frank, they were already doing it on a shoestring. Does the honourable member agree with me that we need to prioritise as a country working with other nations to make sure that this work can continue? Because I know ultimately it might end next month.
Absolutely, I'm grateful to her for that intervention. I think she's right. To pull support from this programme isn't some sort of act of impartiality, it's actually an act of complicity. And the State Department of the United States, I'm sure, must have done it very reluctantly, given the professionals who work there on this programme. To summarise, a short reprieve for this body is not enough. It must be preserved, it must be fully funded, so that we have the evidence that we need in the fullness of time to prosecute these potential war crimes. Thank you.
Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon, and I'd like to add my thanks to my friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, for securing this debate, but also for all the work she's been doing on such an important issue. In August last year, I was delighted, as has become a regular thing now, to be able to attend an event in Victoria Park in my constituency of Glasgow West to celebrate Ukrainian Independence Day. The event was hosted by the Friends of Victoria Park in partnership with the Glasgow branch of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. We celebrated Ukrainian culture, freedom and sovereignty, creating a sense of community, bringing together Ukrainians and Glaswegians who took part in various sporting activities, enjoyed Ukrainian art workshops, perhaps best to gloss over my efforts in that regard, and listened to some very beautiful Ukrainian music. And people across all generations were brought together in a celebration of Ukraine's cultural heritage. But for many Ukrainian children, the opportunity to engage with their heritage is denied. The forced deportation of children by Russia has torn Ukrainian families apart, and the weaponisation of citizenship by the Russian government is making it increasingly difficult for stolen Ukrainian children to be identified and returned to their families and homes. The naturalisation of these children as Russian citizens has a further devastating consequence because it robs Ukraine of its future citizens. And by denying these children their right to be Ukrainian, Russia is systematically working to remove their identity. This ideological strategy comes directly, as we've heard, from the top of the Russian government, with President Putin repeatedly denying the legitimacy of Ukraine's sovereignty and describing Ukrainians as Russians. Beyond the horrific removal of children from Ukraine, the Russian government is using a deliberate tactic of cultural suppression and re-education to further erase the children's Ukrainian identity. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has described the actions of the Russian government as the targeted destruction of Ukraine's culture, noting that the Russian authorities have removed cultural symbols, dismantled Ukrainian language education and rewritten national history within the occupied territories. But sadly, this is not a new tactic. The Russian government also used the forced displacement of children and the erasure of their culture during the annexation of Crimea. In occupied Crimea, this meant that, according to a 2017 review of court records, less than 10% of children born there were able to get a Ukrainian birth certificate. This deliberate war strategy will have long-term implications for the future of Ukraine. And by targeting the youngest members of society, Russia is purposefully raising a future generation whose ties to the country and heritage have been weakened and, of course, in some cases, completely erased. And whilst the government has taken action, which is very welcome, to implement targeted sanctions on Russia to disrupt the military supply chain and the revenue funding for the war, hopefully the same urgency can be applied to identifying and sanctioning those involved in the illegal transfer and mass deportation of children. I'm very taken with the idea of a day of action to highlight this issue, and perhaps we do that on Ukrainian Independence Day in August. But without imminent action, more Ukrainian children will lose touch with their family, their home and their culture. And the effect of this action will have far-reaching and damaging effects for the families, for Ukraine, but most of all, for the children.
I first want to not congratulate, as has been highlighted by the members, but genuinely thank from the bottom of my heart the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South on her leadership on this deeply distressing issue. Her introductory speech was emotional, powerful and passionate, and there wasn't many dry eyes in the chamber when she was speaking. I was on the Ukraine trip with her and other colleagues for the 3-year anniversary, and to see for myself what has happened and what is happening in Ukraine was very moving. But the thing that stuck out for her and I was the appalling actions of the Russian government to remove a generation of children from Ukraine, and this is what the debate is about today. Each story is moving and appalling, of one child being removed from their Ukrainian family where they belong to be taken to Russia. But I want to understand, I want to use an example for the scale of what is happening. In my constituency of Woking, there's around 20,000 children. Imagine if every child in my constituency of Woking, or most of your constituencies, were taken overnight, vanished, they just went. That is the scale of what we are dealing with. That is a theft of a generation, and it defines us to stand up to that. According to research by the Queen Mary University of London,
Clinically significant psychological trauma is estimated to be present among 35% of adolescents in Ukraine. 35% of the whole population. Research amongst the same report shows high levels of PTSD among displaced children with trauma linked not only to conflict exposure but also to family separation, to loss, to property damage, economic hardship and their disrupted education. These findings emphasise the psychological toll that the war is taking, and it extends beyond the battlefield, and it will be particularly profound for those children abducted by the Russian state. The risk of PTSD for them will rise significantly. I remember back in March earlier this year, I tabled a written question asking the Foreign Secretary what steps the UK government is taking to provide funding to track and return these kidnapped children, particularly following the appalling decision of President Donald Trump to withdraw funding from the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab. In response, the British government said that the UK had supported Save Ukraine and Bring Kids Back Ukraine through the Partnership Fund for a Resilient Ukraine. They noted the return of children through the Qatahi mediation in September last year and expressed gratitude to that country for doing so. But let's be honest, the government support, our government support, was lacking in detail, lacking in scale, and particularly lacking in urgency. It made no mention of the United States or a broader international agreement and broader international pressure to bring these children home. It's clear that the current UK efforts just haven't been enough. They haven't met the significant challenge. Frankly, we need to support the work of Bring Back Kids Initiative and Yale Humanitarian Research, but we need to go beyond that as well. More pressure applied via our special relationship to the United States is key. It is time for the UK to take a stronger line. I hope our Prime Minister and our Foreign Secretary should not be afraid to challenge President Donald Trump to ensure the release of those stolen thousands of children from Ukraine. Trump's appalling bromance with Putin is disgusting. But if we have that special relationship with the United States, we should be asking and demanding the US does this. So I want to turn to the questions, Mr. Chairman. I would hope the Foreign Office Minister could confirm if either the Prime Minister or the Foreign Office has raised this issue with the United States, how many times they have raised it with the United States, and what the United States has said in return. Thank you.
James Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I also want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, for bringing this debate to today. It's on a harrowing subject, the systematic abduction and deportation of Ukrainian children, but it's absolutely one that we should be discussing in this House, so I thank her for her work. As has been outlined, on day 1,000 of the conflict, according to UK government figures, at that point, at least 19,500 Ukrainian children had been unlawfully deported to Russia, and independent estimates put that figure much higher. Behind each of those numbers is a name, a family, a severed childhood. Children have been taken from foster care homes, from boarding schools, from hospitals, and even directly from their own families. Many have been placed with Russian families, sent to so-called re-education camps, or absorbed into military patriotic training programmes aimed at erasing Ukrainian identity. These individual stories, already outlined by a number of members here, are heartbreaking. Children being renamed, issued Russian passports, told that their homeland no longer exists, separated from their siblings, told that their parents have never tried to find them, some children even issued with military draft papers. Now, these actions are not merely incidental violations of the rules of war. They are part of a coordinated state policy to erase Ukrainian culture. In my view, they represent war crimes and they constitute crimes against humanity. Today, I think it's important that we recognise and pay tribute to the resilience and the courage of many, many people who are working to bring these children home. Ukrainian officials, NGOs, lawyers, and of course families who have refused to give up even in the face of enormous obstacles. The UK must support these efforts, not only with words, but with practical assistance, funding legal support, supporting reunification logistics, and ensuring that international pressure remains focused and sustained. I will.
For giving way. Does he agree with me that we should not only support the return of the abducted Ukrainian children, but also with their reintegration into their families and communities through rehabilitation programmes that address the psychological and developmental trauma that has been inflicted by their forced deportation?
James
Thank you very much for that intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree. I actually led a council prior to coming to this place, and one of the motions that we passed as a council was to twin ourselves with the part of Ukraine, because we absolutely recognise that the long-term reintegration of Ukrainian people and rebuilding of Ukrainian society was going to take a long, long time, and I think it's going to require a huge global effort to really make that work. So I absolutely welcome that intervention. This is not only a question of justice for Ukraine, it is a test of our commitment to international law and the protection of children in conflict. If we allow forced deportation and indoctrination of children to go unanswered, we risk setting a devastating precedent for future conflicts. I sit on the International Development Committee, and we are seeing international law and international humanitarian law broken in many conflicts across different zones around the world. And it is absolutely important that the UK stands up for the established order, which has served to protect billions of people over several generations, but is under huge attack on many different fronts. Now, I know that the government has worked closely with the US on this issue. A couple of organisations have already been mentioned. So I'd therefore like to ask the Minister what further steps can be taken. I believe that 3 sanctions packages have already been issued, targeting those attempting to forcibly deport and indoctrinate Ukrainian children. But I'd like to know what else is being considered or will be considered in the future. And can the Minister outline what the next steps of the international coalition for the return of Ukrainian children are likely to be? The UK is part of that organisation. What role will the UK government continue to play? Mr Stewart, in this chamber today, we may not be able to return these children ourselves, but we can send a very clear message that their abduction will not be ignored, their identities will not be erased, and their safe return will remain a priority for as long as it takes. And that's because justice demands nothing less.
John Milne.
Thank you, Mr Stewart, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And like others, I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for bringing this debate. Now, we say that as a formal word at the start of every debate, but this is different. This really matters, and I think the Honourable Lady has done a fantastic job since our visit to Ukraine, which I joined her on, in bringing this to not just national attention, because, and we do see it in national news now, but it seems to have got traction internationally as well. And that's fantastic, because up until my visit, like herself, I knew absolutely nothing about it, and was, of all the things I saw, that was the single most shocking. So I learned many things on the trip. The first one, of course, was hospitality. Fantastic people, wherever you go, such warmth, unforgettable. And also that life goes on. It's incredible how people can continue. In 3 years of war now, drones dropping from the sky at every... And we all of us downloaded our drone app, which gave us a warning of drone attacks, and believe me, it was going off all the time. And yet people go about their everyday lives, they go to work, they go to restaurants as if it wasn't happening. Absolutely incredible. I was also really impressed by the ingenuity of the Ukrainian people. Particularly, we visited a secret drone factory, and Ukraine has become the world leaders in drone design and manufacture, and that is, I think, the future of warfare, so we have a lot to learn and be grateful for them for the work they're doing. But it's a kind of level of entrepreneurship that we wouldn't necessarily have expected of an ex-Soviet bloc state. So, and it shows to me, I think, that Ukraine does belong in the West, in Europe. I was also really struck by the commitment to cause. Unpleasant stories were put about by President Putin and others that this was Zelensky's war, that the people of Ukraine weren't really behind him. He was forcing them into war. That is untrue. In every single community, we see you have the flags, the memorial centre, the graves. It is not hidden. It is in full and present view everywhere. All the more so because in the habit of the Orthodox Church, they put the actual photos, the pictures of the fallen there, so it makes it all the more impactful. And of course, we also visited 2 hospitals where we saw rehabilitation of young men with very difficult injuries. And then the other thing I really took out of this, which is a more sort of practical international thing, if you like, or security thing, is we've talked about the need for a European army because of the pressure we're under. That is our army. Ukraine, it is larger than all the rest of Western European armies put together already. For the time it takes us to get our army together, we need to support Ukraine's army because that is our defence. There were light moments in the trip. I'll never forget, we had a night in Kyiv and we were in a lovely hotel, but unfortunately we spent half the night in the bomb shelter because of warnings. And one of the MPs managed to get out on his laptop. We watched Darkest Hour during the parallels with 1940 and where we were in Ukraine were very, very, very striking. At the start of this war, I did not believe that it could get like this because there's the story of Putin was putting out that Ukrainians and Russians were brothers, the same people. I never imagined things could get as violent, as destructive, as vicious as they have done. But of course they did straight away. And we discovered in the Bucha massacre near Kyiv, that was in the first days of the war. It's not like we grew to that moment. It began with that moment. But as we're here today, the worst crime of all for me is the theft and abduction of all these children with this systematic and clearly with the knowledge and indeed instruction of President Putin. He brings shame on Russia, which is a great nation. I can't imagine what it's like to know that your child is alive, but with another family. So I'll say one thing, besides all the other requests that have been made today, it has to be a precondition that there is no peace without the return of those children.
Jim Serve under your chairship, and can I commend the Honourable Lady for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for setting the scene. The Honourable Lady might be small in stature, but she's got the biggest heart in this chamber, so well done. The opportunity to urge our government to continue to do the right thing and act for the innocent people of Ukraine is the reason why we're all here.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way? I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and the strength of feeling in this room is shown by his raw emotion and the emotion of my honourable friend before him. Does the honourable member agree with me that the opportunity for us to come together cross-party and recognise the need to continue to support these Ukrainian families is the most important thing we can do today?
Yeah. Jim Shannon.
Thank the Honourable Lady for the intervention, much appreciated. The forced deportation of Ukrainian children without their parents by Russian forces is a grave violation of international humanitarian law. Yeah. Indeed, I go as far as to say that these actions constitute a war crime under Article 8 of the Rome Statute, which explicitly forbids the unlawful deportation or transfer of protected persons. These acts targeting the most vulnerable have torn families apart and eroded the culture and the national identity of Ukraine's future generations. Article 6 of the Rome Statute also says the systematic and calculated manner of these abductions is evidenced by the reports of some 20,000 Ukrainian children. The figures are unknown. The Honourable Lady referred to that, but who knows what they really are? This demands, I believe, urgent scrutiny to determine if these crimes meet the threshold for genocide. These children torn from their families and homeland are victims of a deliberate campaign by Russians and Belarusians authorities not only to erase their identity and culture, but to erase them of the memories of their families. So this is not just a humanitarian crisis, this is a moral outrage. The forced deportation by Russian authorities during the ongoing conflict has created a stolen generation, a term that is reminiscent of other historical cases, such as Australia's stolen generation, where government policy saw Indigenous children move from their families and communities to assimilate them to a different cultural identity. Wrong then, wrong now. To steal a nation's children is to steal its future. The United Kingdom must lead with moral and legal clarity in agreeing the course of actions and holding Russia's feet to the fire over these crimes against humanity. We must, I believe, intensify our sanctions on Russian and Belarusian officials, military and other state actors complicit in these abductions. We must demand justice through international legal bodies, including the International Criminal Court, to hold perpetrators accountable. And the UK must, I believe, support investigations and advocate for expedited arrest warrants. Justice delayed is justice denied. These children and their grieving families cannot wait. The scale of this tragedy remains unreported by the mainstream media. That this debate today, I believe, amplifies the voices of Ukrainian families, places pressure on policymakers, and signals to Russia that the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland stands firmly against this greatest act of sheer inhumanity. The forced transfer of children is explicitly defined as genocide under Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention. I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman. The abduction of Ukrainian children is yet another stain on humanity's already overburdened conscience. By intensifying sanctions, pursuing justice, acknowledging the genocidal nature of Russia's actions, the UK can be a leader in demanding the return of these children to their families. We cannot stand idly by while their futures are stolen. So I look to the Minister and believe he is of the same mind. We must act with the urgency and the conviction this crisis demands, and remind Russia that good people will not stand idly by.
Lisa Smart.
Very much, Mr. Stewart. It really is a pleasure to have you in the chair, and I want to join all colleagues across this room today in thanking the honourable member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. She has led on this issue with determination and relentlessness, and is an example to all of us. The people of Ukraine are fighting for their country and their continued existence, but they are also fighting for us. There is no way Putin will stop in Ukraine if he gets what he wants. And it is right, therefore, that the UK is supporting Ukraine and should continue to do so until a just and lasting peace on Ukraine's terms is found. I was most recently in Kyiv 3 weeks ago as part of a delegation of Liberal MPs from across Europe, and I was fortunate enough to meet Ukrainian MPs in the Rada and to meet the Ukrainian Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, the Ombudsman, who is undertaking incredible work in documenting the extent of the various international crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine and working with international partners to bring these children home. One of the most moving moments of my recent visit came when we met two of the children who had experienced for themselves the brutal policy of forced deportation and assimilation. One had had to work relentlessly to have his younger brother returned, and the other had escaped Russian re-education himself by walking for days to get to safety. Their stories are not isolated tragedies. They are part of a wider state-sponsored strategy to destroy the nation of Ukraine. Last year, the UK rightly helped to launch the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children, designed to coordinate joint efforts, and I commend this government for its commitment to this. But it is clear that much more is needed. We must demand the full implementation of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child's 2024 recommendations to Russia. We must push for humanitarian and monitoring access to any facilities holding these children. We must facilitate communications with authorities to ensure safe returns. And the Ukrainian Ombudsman himself told me that the international community does need a special tribunal to take full account of these crimes and properly hold Putin and his flunkies to account. Each day these children remain outside their homes and outside their homeland is a day that justice is denied, and our role is clear. We must help bring them home. The stealing of thousands of Ukrainian children is a particularly heinous crime, but there are also millions more Ukrainian children who have lost their childhoods by Putin's actions. And on my recent visit, I also visited Chernihiv to see the extent of the damage caused by constant attacks. I saw for myself the basement in Yehidny, where, in the early days of Russia's full-scale invasion, dozens of nearby inhabitants, including babies and children, were rounded up by Russian soldiers and tortured for weeks before being liberated by the Ukrainian army. I wanted to talk about that because we know one of the weapons of war used by the Russian government is mis- and disinformation. And in its programme of trying to dehumanise the Ukrainian people, it also tries to paint them as not telling the truth. I saw for myself, and the looks in the eyes of the people who told me of their experience will stay with me for a very, very long time. With pleasure.
Honourable Lady, and thank you, Mr Stewart, and for you in the chair, and congratulate the Honourable Member not just for today's speech, but what seems an incredible piece of work across the country, trying to get people aware of what these awful things are happening just over in Europe. I am very lucky in Redditch to have a large Ukrainian population. People have fled from the Donbass and other areas for the last few years. Children that have had 20 homes in their short few years on this planet, and now they're here from their homeland of friends and family members who've been forcibly removed and lost by their families and taken to Russia. When you make that powerful point about disinformation, we see it every day and hear about it every day in Redditch, about the impact it's having on families and family members who may never see those family members ever again.
Yeah. I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman for talking about Ukrainian communities who are contributing so much in our country. I have asked the government to give further clarity in more than an 18-month period of visa extensions, and I think that's something that this government could do to continue to show support for those Ukrainians living within all of our constituencies, because we know far too many Ukrainians are being rejected from tenancies, jobs, studying opportunities because they don't have that length of visa ahead of them. The point about mis- and disinformation is absolutely right. It is being used more, and it's not a new tool, but it is being used in many more sophisticated ways, and it is something that we need to work across government and internationally to combat. I absolutely agree with him. In closing, Mr Stewart, I repeat previous calls that I and others have made for the government to move from freezing to actively seizing Russian assets, both the principal and the interest, because we need to support Ukraine's defence and its reconstruction. I think the government is taking the right approach in coordinating these efforts multilaterally, but the UK should be in a position to lead on this, and should progress stall, we must be willing to act unilaterally. These children must be returned, and Putin and his flunkies must pay for their crimes.
Alan Miller.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, Mr Stewart, and I, like everyone else, want to thank the honourable member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for securing this important debate, and for the commitment and tenacity she has shown in raising this topic about which she cares so deeply. It is, Mr Stewart, so important that we are discussing this shocking topic today. Of all the crimes the Russian leadership has committed in its invasion of Ukraine, this is the most distressing. No Ukrainian deserves to be caught up in this horrendous war, but we are all touched by the vulnerabilities of babies and children, so it is heartbreaking to consider what has been done to them and to family members who see their child ripped from their care. The emotion we have seen from members here is testament to how deeply that is felt by members of this House. Honourable members have spoken with compassion and concern about this subject, and I welcome the consensus across all parties that we share the commitment to work together to challenge Russia's crimes. Many, including the members for Torbay, Chester South and Edinburgh, Woking, Horsham and Hazel Grove, have referred to the impact of their visits to Ukraine and the experiences that they had there, and I am grateful for their testimony. We've also heard, and members have underscored, the depth of friendship between the UK and Ukraine, including the Honourable Member for Glasgow West, recalling celebrating Ukraine Independence Day in the beautiful Victoria Park. Others have highlighted specific cases, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Glenrothes and Mid-Fife for referring to the experience of disabled children. Also to the members for Redditch and Hazel Grove for drawing our attention to the experience of those Ukrainian children and young people here in the UK. We've also heard from members practical suggestions, the Day of Action as proposed by the Honourable Member for Western Bartonshire, and my honourable friend for Hazel Grove calling for the seizing of Russian assets. Mr Stewart, this gruesome project is the product of the twisted will and inhumanity of one man, Vladimir Putin. Driven by his imperial ambitions and this archaic vision of a Russian empire, he aims not only to destroy Ukraine's independence, but also to erase its future. his systematic programme for the abduction and forced assimilation into Russia of at least 20,000 Ukrainian children will go down as one of the most vile acts not only of this war, but of this century. As other members have mentioned, the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab has indicated that the real figures are likely to be much, much higher. And sadly, we can only expect they will continue to rise so long as Putin's invasion and control of occupied territory continues. The Yale Lab has identified at least 43 children's camps throughout Russia to house deported children, of which at least 32 are explicitly labelled as, quote, re-education facilities. The former Ukrainian Children's Rights Commissioner, Mykola Kuleba, puts it chillingly in saying that these re-education programmes constitute, and I quote, death camps for Ukrainian identity. In March, as the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth highlighted, President Trump and Elon Musk took the callous decision to slash funding for the Yale Lab, an organisation which has been helping lead the search for the tens of thousands of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. Gathering evidence of these war crimes is critical. It matters because it will allow prosecutors to go after the architects of this atrocity. It also matters because it increases the chances that when the conflict ends, these children might be returned to their Ukrainian homes. On the 1st of April, I asked the Foreign Secretary whether the UK would step in to fill the funding gap left by the US administration. He said then that, and I quote, "It is not our assessment that we can meet the shortfall left by the withdrawal of USAID." I know the Minister is committed to this question, so may I take this opportunity to ask him what sum would be required for the Yale Lab to continue its critical work, and what the Government has done working with partners to secure the future of this project. Reports suggest that the Lab's data repository could soon be transferred to Europol so that its vital work can take forward. So can the Minister state whether these reports are accurate and what support the UK is offering? Of course.
Thank you for giving way. I just wanted to note that this morning I met with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which does great work around good governance, electoral integrity, democratic rights and citizen engagement. And they have lost 70% of their funding as a result of USAID cuts. They absolutely recognise this morning they will play a fundamental role in how Ukraine is rebuilt to deal with the disinformation that the Honourable Lady talked about earlier today. So would he agree with me that we also need to make sure that we're looking at how organisations like this are protected so that when Ukraine rebuilds, it is rebuilding in the right way and to deal with the challenges that its neighbour will present?
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member Redditch for his intervention. I wholeheartedly agree. This country, as well as the USA, should take responsibility for both its hard power and its soft power. And in the same way that the UK and its US ally has historically been willing to support Ukraine's defence in the face of Russia's aggression, we must too make sure that we invest in the peace by supporting these kinds of democratic institutions. And I believe it is the shame of this government that it has cut so significantly the UK's aid budget. So I welcome the steps taken in the agreement that was struck on Monday to restore elements of judicial cooperation with our European partners. And I hope the Government will now take the opportunity to strengthen cooperation with Europol ahead of the transfer of any data relating to these crimes, so it can support the work of tracking and bringing home Ukraine's stolen children. While there are no signs of a change in Russia's policy now, we must also plan for a future when the children are returned and support those already rescued by organisations like Bring Our Kids Back. They will undoubtedly be traumatised and deeply affected by their experiences, as the Honourable Members for Woking, Chester South and Edinburgh and Chichester have highlighted. So can I ask the Minister what steps the UK Government can take now to support the Ukrainian Government and civil society in developing programmes of psychological support for children and their families? The last Conservative Government agreed to the sale of Chelsea Football Club and that the proceeds would be forfeited by Roman Abramovich and used to benefit civilians in Ukraine. Yet those funds, £2.5 billion, have still not been deployed. I asked the Foreign Secretary what progress was being made on the 24th of February. I asked again on the 17th of March, and he said that he was frustrated by the lack of progress and that he would consider, and I quote, all the tools available to government. So can the Minister update us on what is holding up the release of these funds, and can he say which tools the government is now using to secure their release? In recognition of their crimes, as other members have mentioned, the ICC has issued arrest warrants for President Putin as well as for Maria Lvova-Belova. It is a foul irony that her title is Russia's Children's Rights Commissioner. All those involved must be held responsible and accountable for their involvement and complicity. The government needs to be laser-focused in identifying those individuals and entities against whom sanctions should be applied so that they are held accountable today for their actions. and it should do this in concert with our international allies, as the member for Rushcliffe highlighted. By both strengthening Ukraine and undermining Putin's ability to prosecute his war, particularly through the use of sanctions, we can work to give President Zelensky the maximum leverage he needs in any future peace negotiations. A core aspect of any just peace must be the return of the Ukrainian children stolen by the Kremlin. Anything less will only embolden Putin and other authoritarian leaders like him, who would otherwise hope to continue acting with complete impunity and relentless cruelty. So as Ukraine continues to fight not only for its freedom today, but also for future generations, I am glad that this House is recommitting itself to that cause. Ukraine's security is our security. We have a categorical moral imperative to help secure its future by supporting every effort to return Ukraine's stolen children.
Neil Morton.
Thank you, Mr Stewart, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And let me start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South on securing this debate. She has spoken with passion and sincerity in this place, not just today, but on a number of occasions. And I join her in welcoming the delegation from Ukraine, who I'm sure, in listening to this debate, will go away totally convinced of the extent of the cross-party support for their country and its people. Through the passionate and emotional contributions today, it has been very, very clear. And many members, including my honourable friend, the member for Chester South and Edisbury, have reflected on personal visits that they have made to the country and its people. Few crimes are as harrowing or as telling as the theft of a child. And that is what we are debating today. The forced abduction, deportation and ideological reprogramming of Ukrainian children by the Russian state. So I think we need to call it out for what it is. It's not a relocation or evacuation, as the Kremlin may dress it up, but a systemic, state-sponsored assault on identity, sovereignty and humanity itself. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022, more than 19,500 Ukrainian children are known to have been forcibly removed from their homes and transferred across Russian-occupied territory and into Russia itself. Independent estimates suggest the true figure could be more than double that. And as we've heard today, with each child taken, we are seeing families torn apart, culture erased, and the future of a nation under threat. And behind every number or statistic, Mr Stewart, is a child, a family, friends and loved ones. So, Chair, I want to make 3 points today. First, Russia's actions are not just indefensible, they are calculated, deliberate and disgraceful. Second, during our time in government, the Conservatives led the way, not just with weapons and sanctions, but with unwavering moral clarity and practical action in support of Ukraine. And third, I urge the current government to be clear-eyed and bold, build upon what we started, and not to flinch in the face of Putin's cruelty. Mr Stewart, I've had the privilege of visiting Ukraine on 2 occasions, once as a Foreign Minister back in 2021, and then again in 2023 as a backbencher with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. On my first visit, I stood alongside Ukrainian leaders at the launch of the Crimea platform. It was a powerful signal of international solidarity. And even then, Russia's creeping aggression in the Donbass and the Crimea casts a long shadow. But the spirit of the Ukrainian people shone through. When I returned 2 years later, though, Ukraine was in the grip of war as a result of Putin's illegal invasion. Towns scarred by missile strikes, civilians forced underground, and families scattered across borders. But what struck me most was the resilience of the people that I met. The parliamentarians who had lost colleagues, mothers who'd sent their sons to the front line, children forced to be educated in bunkers at school, and civil society leaders rebuilding community life amid chaos. They are not just resisting an illegal military invasion, they are resisting an assault on their identity, their history, and, as we've heard clearly today, their children. That is why the forced deportation of Ukrainian children is such a grotesque element of this war. It is wrong. These are not isolated incidents. These are part of a strategy to wipe out the next generation of Ukrainians by forcefully assimilating them into Russia, renaming them, placing them with Russian families, indoctrinating them in so-called re-education camps. This is not just child abduction, it's cultural erasure. That is why the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, and rightly so. Now, let me just turn to what we did in government as Conservatives in response. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the UK did not hesitate. We were among the first to send advanced weapons to Ukraine: anti-tank missiles, long-range precision arms, air defence systems. We trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops under Operation Interflex, and we coordinated international aid. And we introduced the largest and most severe package of sanctions in UK history, targeting around 2,000 Russian individuals and entities, and we sanctioned Maria Lvova-Belova over the forced transfer and adoption of Ukrainian children. Under our watch, we didn't just stand with Ukraine in principle, we stood with them in practice. We understood and we understand that helping Ukraine defend itself was not just charity, it was national security, and we treated it as such. But we also understood that Russia's war crimes required a broader response. That's why we supported the gathering of evidence for war crimes prosecutions, we championed media freedom and democratic resilience in Ukraine, and supported Ukrainian civil society, which is the lifeblood of any free nation. And I was proud, in government and out, to advocate for Ukraine, from sanctioning oligarchs to calling out disinformation, to welcoming Ukrainian families into British homes through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, including some in my own constituency. And the question now is, what is the current government doing to continue to build on this legacy? And I know the Minister, I'm sure, will be setting that out. But the moral imperative could not be clearer. Returning these children must be a top diplomatic priority, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire international community. Because if we do not act now, Mr. Stewart, we normalise the weaponisation of children in conflict. We send the message that the forced erasure of national identity can go unpunished. So let me ask, what is the government doing to press international bodies, including the UN and the OSCE, to intensify efforts to track and return these children? What support is the UK providing to Ukrainian and international NGOs who are engaged in tracing, documenting and litigating these cases? And what diplomatic pressure is the government applying to countries who are complicit in circumventing sanctions or turning a blind eye to Russia's war crimes, including Belarus, which has been directly implicated? And while I welcome the commitment to £3 billion in annual military aid to Ukraine, I must ask, how much funding is earmarked for protecting civilians, for documenting atrocities and countering the ideological indoctrination of abducted children? Because, Mr. Stewart, Ukraine does not need just tanks. It needs truth and it needs justice. So let me end with this. In every Ukrainian family torn apart by abduction, there is a mother waiting, a father grieving, and a sibling left behind. Each stolen child is not just a tragedy, it is a test of whether the democratic world will match words with action. We on this side of the House say we must. We led the way in government and we will continue to hold the line in opposition. We owe it to Ukraine, we owe it to the families, and we owe it to every principle this place is meant to defend. Thank you.
Minister, with a reminder to finish by 58 at the latest.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stewart, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairpersonship today. And I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, for securing this debate and for all of the contributions today. I think they've been extraordinarily powerful, united, and send a very, very strong message, I think, from this House and this place, not only of support to Ukraine and Ukrainians, but also to Vladimir Putin, who is ultimately responsible for these wicked and heinous crimes. And I want to also welcome the delegation who've been with us today. I don't think all of them are still with us, but Ukrainian officials, including the Deputy Speaker of the Rada, Olena Kondratyuk. And I hope that the contributions of all of the Honourable and Right Honourable members today will have reassured our Ukrainian friends that this whole House stands with you and will remain with you until Ukraine prevails. And I think the raw emotion that we have heard today, I think really demonstrate that I think when it comes to children, that this House is united. And whether it's the scenes we see in Gaza or Sudan or Ukraine, I think the plight of children should unite us all and should unite parliamentarians and legislatures around the world in seeing the reality, in this case, of what Vladimir Putin has done, because the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children is one of the most appalling aspects of Russia's brutal invasion. As we've heard, Mr. Stewart, approaching 20,000 children have been torn from their homes, families and communities have been torn apart in this barbaric conflict, and the forcible removal to Russian areas, the indoctrination, the attempts to wipe out Ukrainian identity, I think have shocked the world. 6,000 children, we believe, have been sent to re-education, so-called camps, to indoctrinate them with pro-Russian sentiment. And it is very clear this is an attempt not only to hurt Ukraine and its people now, but also to hurt Ukraine's future, as has been, I think, rightly reflected on. So let me be clear, Mr. Stewart, Russia must end the deportation, exploitation and manipulation of Ukrainian children. They must be reunited with their families, and we will do everything in our power as a government to make that happen and to ensure, Mr. Stewart, that those responsible for these crimes face justice. And let me say again, as I have in a number of these debates, this is personal for me, having visited Ukraine 3 times since the start of Russia's illegal invasion, including just a few months ago, and also because I grew up studying alongside Ukrainians as a teenager in Canada, and I taught young Ukrainians in Lviv when I was younger. And to think of those, my fellow schoolmates, or indeed those young people that I taught, being taken away and torn away from their families and their culture and their identity and language, fills me with absolute horror. And going to places like Bucha and not only seeing the reality of what they faced in atrocities at the start of this war, but also the fact that they are still missing children and people who we have no idea where they are, I think is particular, should be brought to all of our attentions. So I've also heard firsthand from the different delegations who have come here of that trauma that has been laid at Ukrainian children. And in March, Mr. Stewart, I met with Deputy Foreign Minister Betsa alongside Bring Kids Back Ukraine and Save Ukraine, and I made clear to them, and I do so again now, that our support for returning those children is unwavering. We discussed many ways in which we could expand and deepen our work together, and indeed Bring Kids Back gave me a painting by a child who was forcibly deported but now thankfully has returned, but he's going through that trauma and is now in art therapy, and it hangs in my office, and it's a daily reminder to me of why this work matters. Children must never be used as pawns of war, and those who do so must be held accountable. That's why we've given 11.3 million to help Ukraine document, investigate and prosecute war crimes. We've contributed 2 million to the International Criminal Court so it can gather evidence and support survivors more effectively. And indeed, going back to 2022, the UK led the way in bringing together allies to speed up an ICC investigation into alleged Russian war crimes in Ukraine. And with 41 other countries now backing the UK, it's the largest referral in the ICC's history. And we welcome the progress the ICC is making with its, of course, independent investigations. And this, of course, includes the arrest warrants issued for President Putin and the so-called Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the illegal deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children. I will give way very briefly.
Thank you. The Minister is making a typically human account of humane account of what we are debating and what I've been privy to be able to see today. It is a real strength of feeling to see the House so united on such an appalling issue. I have one question to ask the Minister specifically. Can he confirm if, as we've seen yesterday with the change of the muscularity in which we are now engaging on the Israel-Gaza issue, if the UK will formally recognise these mass abductions as a violation of international law, but that also the return of these children must be a precondition to any final lifting of sanctions and a completed peace process?
Stephen Doughty.
Well, I've been very clear, as the Foreign Secretary was yesterday, that we respect the independence of international courts and international judicial processes, as I've just done about the ICC. But I also am absolutely clear that this must be resolved, that Russia must return these children. We are clear that we are not going to be lifting our sanctions, Mr Stewart, and that we will reserve the right to take further measures as are necessary, as we have done just in the last 24 hours, and we will continue to do so. I was asked many times about the UK's specific efforts. We are working closely as a member of the International Coalition for the Return of Ukrainian Children. We're working closely with the Ukrainian government, and that, of course, includes initiatives to identify, locate and return children to their families, collaborating on diplomatic efforts and providing financial and logistical support. Our overseas missions are hosting events to raise the issue locally in capitals around the world. We're bringing together experts from a range of backgrounds and countries, from academia, from industry, from other countries that have also suffered from conflict. This was something I discussed with the Deputy Minister when she was here to support that work to get the children returned. I've already mentioned Save Ukraine and Bring Kids Back initiative. We're providing practical and political support to both. And the Foreign Secretary has also been working with Mrs Zelensky to support Ukraine's children. He met her in Kiev in February to discuss her campaign to end the Soviet legacy of institutionalised care, which was also referred to, instead promoting family-based care and providing support to foster families. And in our wider diplomatic efforts, I was asked by the Shadow Minister, we're continuing to work at the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, where we're calling out Russia's unacceptable actions and challenging their lies. We're also supporting the OSCE's support programme for Ukraine and their fact-finding missions to expose human rights abuses, including deportation. And we've also been clear, and it was asked in the United Nations, in December, our permanent representative made absolutely clear in the Security Council that in no uncertain terms Russia must stop these deportations and return Ukrainian children to their homes, and we indeed also welcome the renewal of the UN's Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. And we also note the significant role that Qatar is playing in mediating the return of Ukrainian children. We're grateful for their engagement, and these efforts are of course part of wider diplomatic initiatives involving others, including the Holy See and NGOs like Save Ukraine. And around 900 children have returned thanks to these efforts. I will give way briefly.
I don't for one moment doubt the Minister's sincerity or his determination to bring this to a satisfactory conclusion. But we all know that one of the keys to this is President Trump. And very little has been said, even in this debate, about the pressure that can and should be brought to bear upon Trump and Putin together. Would he make sure, or seek to make sure, he hasn't got a magic wand, but would he make sure, as far as he can, that this does not go off the agenda and forms part of any settlement?
He can be assured that we raise a series of matters in our engagement with the United States on this, and we're working closely, obviously, with President Trump and his administration on finding a ceasefire, but one that is just and lasting and sustainable. We're working together with our European partners and the United States on that, of course, with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, and many meetings in the last few days that he and others will have seen. And I can assure him that I raise this on regular occasions. I met with congressional delegations in the last few weeks where I specifically raised this issue, and again, broad bipartisan concern and shared concern for this particular issue, and I will continue to do that. But I want to return in the last few moments that I have, Mr Stewart, just to respond to some of the very specific questions that were written and the points that were made. Again, I want to thank the Honourable Member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South for her powerful and passionate expose of this wicked and heinous action by Putin's regime. She's been doing fantastic work on this issue, and I fully endorse that, and I think it should unite us all in this House. She spoke powerfully of her visit to Ukraine, as many members did, and she also asked about the Yale research. I've written to her about this, and I want to add a little correction to what I've written to her on this point, which is my understanding is that the data has now been sent to Europol, and that we're endeavouring to make sure that gets to the Ukrainian government officer, the Prosecutor General, as soon as possible. We're going to be following up on that, so I will update as soon as we have further information on that. The member for Chester South and Edisbury spoke about the importance of retaining our ODA support and the humanitarian assistance, and she'll note that despite the cuts that we're having to make, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan have been all highlighted as areas where we'll continue to have special attention, and I've been looking at our programmes and seeing what more we can do with them over the weeks and months ahead. I also want to return to the points made by my honourable friend from Glen Rotherson mid-Fife about disabled children. I think I want to make clear that we have particularly focused on disability inclusion and rehabilitation services in the £5 million worth of support that we've provided, and indeed we also supported that through the Partnership Fund for Resilience Ukraine. So I think you made some very, very important points there. I'll write to him, just in case I haven't got the figures exactly right, Mr Stewart. I will write to him to make sure he gets the exact numbers on that, because I wouldn't want to inadvertently mislead the House on that, Mr Stewart. Of course, the Honourable Member for Honiton and Sidmouth, who I know well, and we travelled to Ukraine together and saw the reality not long after the illegal invasion, also spoke about that Yale research, but he also raised the situation regarding Belarus, as other members did, and we're deeply concerned by the attendance of Ukrainian children at so-called recreation camps in Belarus, and we're following closely the investigations into those transfers and what's happening there, and we of course call on Belarus to ensure no Ukrainian children are forcibly transferred to or via its territory, and I'll continue to follow that very, very closely. The Honourable Member for Glasgow West was passionate to spoke about the local support in her own constituency, which is similar to that in my own in Cardiff South and Penarth. In the Honourable Member for Woking also raised questions about how we're engaging with the United States. I hope I answered that, and also spoke about that important research into trauma and the work that needs to be done. We're providing a lot of support in relation to mental health and psychosocial support. That is absolutely crucial, and it's important that he raised it. My honourable friend also raised about the National Day of Action. I've noted her requests for this, and indeed from other members. I've asked officials to consider the merits of supporting that and getting behind it, and I hope to be able to update her soon on that. The member for Rushcliffe raised important questions about our own programmes and ensure that our concerns for children are going to remain at the heart of those. And indeed, members raised many questions about sanctions, and we've already issued a number of rounds of sanctions in relation to this issue specifically, as well as our wider Russia sanctions regime. I can assure the House that, again, while I won't comment on future designations, we keep all matters under very, very close review. And the member for Horsham spoke passionately about his experience of the resilience and ingenuity of Ukrainians, and I've seen that again and again. My honourable friend from Strangford always speaks passionately on these issues. We absolutely cannot stand idly by, Mr Stewart, and indeed the member for Hazel Grove made that very, very clear as well. I've updated the House on many other times about the issues around the seized assets in Chelsea and so on, but obviously I'll continue to keep the House closely informed on those, and I hope to be able to update the House in due course on those matters too, that we are working on at a pace with international and other partners. So in conclusion, Mr Stewart, I just want to say, let me reiterate, the UK will not let up until Ukraine's stolen children are returned. This is a heinous and wicked and, in my view, unforgivable crime. And I want to see action taken on this. And we will continue to work with our allies and the brilliant campaign organisations I have mentioned, and of course the government of Ukraine, to trace, return those children and to hold Russia to account.
Joanna Baxter to wind up.
Thank you so much, Mr Stewart. I thank every honourable member who has participated in this debate today. I won't be able to do justice to all of them in the time that I have, but just to say I think the strength and depth of feeling that has been expressed by colleagues across this House should send a strong message to President Putin that this is a heinous crime that we all object to. The member for Strangford reminds us of the urgency of this issue. Justice delayed is justice denied, as he said. And this summer, as I mentioned earlier, 53,000 children are expected to attend summer camps in Russia. We need to make sure that those children return home. And just to reiterate the point that there can be no lasting peace in Ukraine without the return of these children. I would ask the Minister to consider again the sanctions, particularly aligning the sanctions of individuals involved in the forced and illegal deportation of these children with those that have been applied by the US and the EU. I would ask for a little clarity, if he's able to write to me afterwards, on the terms of reference for the Special Tribunal on the Crime of Aggression to ensure that it covers this issue, and whether the government will continue to investigate whether these crimes meet the definition of genocide under international law, I thank him for his commitment to coming back to me on the National Day of Action. I think that would certainly help in raising awareness of this issue, and would also just plead that the government look again at the issue of rehabilitation for these children, given the very severe trauma that they will have gone through. If we are able to return them home, they will need a lot of support. So I thank every member that has contributed so powerfully to the debate today.
Hear, 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 hear. The question is that this House has considered returning forcibly deported children to Ukraine. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. And if we can switch over swiftly so we don't bite into the 4 o'clock debate. Thank you. Most likely Warinda Just, isn't it?
Well, we've got three on the list.
Oh yes, Willstone.
And one is ours. Might have to clarify this.
Yeah, shall I get cracking?